Welcome to Paternal Heart Radio.
Lumen Patriarcharum.
All right, welcome back, everybody, to Paternal Heart Radio, the home of the Lumen Patriarcharum. I am here with my co-host, Dan Stevens. What's going on, Dan? How you doing?
Good. I'm just happy to be here again.
Right
and
on.
Get the whole paternal heart going.
Absolutely. Rock on. Hey, so today, guys, we're going to got a pretty interesting episode. We're just going to be taking a brief minute to talk about our faith journey. Kind of how we came about to the Latin Mass. Not trying to bore you with the crazy details, but both Dan and I have some pretty unique stories. I think not unique, pretty common stories for many people that find their way into the Latin Mass, that's for sure. But it's always good to kind of see where we're coming from and to know that, we all started somewhere. And again, just in line with that, living with intention, right? Neither one of us came to the Latin Mass just because we felt like it either. We made a very intentional choice to come. And so we're gonna go ahead and start off with that, or that's what we're gonna be talking about today. So before we do that, we're gonna start off with our prayer to Saint Joseph, our intercessory prayer. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen and take my hat off here. It takes me a minute to do this. All right. Nomine Patris et Filii Spiritus Sancti. Amen. O Saint Joseph, whose protection is so great, so strong, so prompt before the throne of God, I place in you all my interests and desires. O Saint Joseph, do assist me by your powerful intercession and obtain for me from your divine Son all spiritual blessings through Jesus Christ our Lord, so that having engaged here below your heavenly power, I may offer my thanksgiving and homage to the most loving of fathers.
O Saint Joseph, I never weary contemplating you and Jesus asleep in your arms. I dare not approach while he reposes near your heart. Press him in my name and kiss his fine head for me, and ask him to return the kiss when I draw my dying breath. Saint Joseph, patron of departing souls, pray for us. Amen.
Amen. Nomine Patris et Filii Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Awesome. Get back to there you are. Sweet, my bald head. Gotta get a hat on that thing, man.
Are you getting a razor on that thing?
I am. Back the other day, you guys gotta be careful when you shave your head because I don't have any hair anyway, so I get rid of it. But I slipped in the shower. And probably took more than just hair on the back of my head. So yeah, it was pretty bad. It was rough, dude.
I'm glad you survived, man.
I did. I survived. They got a battle wound to prove it. Cool. Well, Dan, I'm gonna go ahead and let you start off. How was your faith journey? Where did you? First of all, just briefly, where you grew up. Did you grow up Catholic? Did you? How did you stumble into your faith? Were you born with it or?
Well, that's a good question, Matt. So I am a revert, and in my college years, I used to like to play a lot of heavy metal, and a lot of that was pretty dark in nature. So kind of got away from my faith due to my mom and dad. They got divorced when I was in high school and kind of carried a little anger there. And I think it was that anger or excuse that kind of led me to believe in maybe more darker type stuff. And I was into like a lot of probably opposite Catholic faith type stuff. But I knew during college and listening to this that it was not making me happy. And during this time frame, I was about to join the Air Force. It's when I decided to serve my country. But in that time frame, my grandmother, she was she was actually dying of 3 different types of cancers.
Oof.
And she was a very devout lady and prayed the rosary. And her request for the family was to say the rosary every Friday. So I had happened to have been to one of those Friday evenings when which she prayed the rosary, and I was sitting with my grandfather, and he was like, "Hey, let's go pray the rosary." And initially, I was like, "I ain't gonna do anything," you know. And so we went to go pray the rosary, and I remember looking at my grandmother, and she was so joyful despite knowing that she was in her last days. And here I was, so full of life, and uh, was not happy at all. But I kind of realized like the suffering that she was going through, and yet she was so joyful. There was something more to, uh, the rosary and Our Lady of Fatima. And so I soon had a conversion or a reversion experience through the rosary. And that is pretty much what led me back to the faith.
Gotcha.
So,
How was your formation as a kid?
so I would say any Novus Ordo formation was very, the doctrine wasn't there. Pretty basic catechism courses. No, I'll be honest. The formation was just not there. Pretty watered down. Taught you only the basics. Even and with that said too, I went to Catholic school too.
Oh wow, how many years
Grammar
did you go?
school.
How many
So
years?
I would have to say, even going through Catholic school, and that's a completely different topic. Uh,
That's a whole nother
but
show in
yeah,
itself,
I know.
man.
Um, just the formation was not there,
Sure.
and very watered down. Kind of basics. I mean, your seven sacraments, and that's it. But didn't really go into too much detail with what sin actually is. It's not just about hitting your sister or talking back to your mom and confessing that. Just to go to confession because everyone else is doing it, type of thing. So that's kind of like my formation growing up. I mean, I was an altar server and did all those things in the Novus Ordo, but I always kind of questioned like, why are we doing this? So what's the point? You know, so that's kind of like my formation, but it wasn't until later that I realized that it's a free choice. It's based on your free will to want to believe, and God does not force you to do anything. He gives you that free will to act, and He'll lead you if you love Him and you make a commitment to Him. So that's pretty much my upbringing in a nutshell.
Yeah. How many years did you go to Catholic school?
So I went from first grade to high school.
Oh
So 12th,
wow.
12th grade.
Oh dang. So you spent your whole
Yeah, pretty much my
career.
whole life in Catholic school. But the atmosphere didn't really feel I mean, too Catholic. I mean, maybe more so through grammar school and junior high, but the high school didn't really feel uh, Catholic in nature. So
Sure. I went to Catholic school from sixth grade to eighth grade, and I'll talk about that a little bit in mine too. But you and I have excruciatingly similar
yeah,
backgrounds.
to be quite honest, it just felt like you were going through the motions growing up. With I guess how the Novus Ordo is, like the singing and guitar playing, not really understanding that in the Mass is where it's really at.
Yeah.
Um, and I mean, don't get me wrong. If it wasn't for the Novus Ordo, I wouldn't be where I am today as far as the Latin Mass goes, because there are some very reverent Novus Ordo, you know, uh, Latin and masses that go on. I mean, if it wasn't for the traditional Novus Ordos, I don't think I would be at the Latin Mass either. So
Yeah, absolutely. There's always kind of that like weird from a lot of people that I know that grew up that way, in the Novus Order, to include myself, there comes a point where you're kind of like, man, there's got to be something different.
There's more,
Yeah, there's something more. Yeah.
But I didn't even know the Latin Mass had existed. I thought it was like obsolete,
Yeah. So did a lot of us. You're not the only one.
I mean, I didn't know that it was still a practice, or the Latin Mass, but being that it's so underground, you wouldn't know if you weren't truly devout. But I can honestly say, I'm very grateful for the Holy Spirit to guide me into the Latin Mass. Actually, it's my wife who really sealed the deal for me.
Yeah, I was gonna say she was brought up in that. So
yeah, she was brought up in the Latin Mass, and
you were dragged kicking and screaming. No,
yeah,
just kidding.
no, well, actually, so how I really got involved in the Latin Mass, I was stationed in Seattle, Washington, and I would go to Blessed Sacrament Parish in Seattle, a Dominican parish, and I had the opportunity to meet an FSSP priest at one of the functions there for the young adults. And he introduced himself, and he was just like, hey, you ever want to check out a Latin Mass? And I was just like, sure, I've always been pretty gung-ho when it comes to Latin and tradition. So I wanted to check it out, and he invited me, and he saw me at one of his the masses that he was going to say, and then he actually approached me after the mass to ask me, like, what was your experience like, and I thought that was pretty cool. And just, out of the blue, like, what did you think? And of course, in my mind, I was like, am I back in the 1950s or something?
Yeah,
with all the veils and everything, and I'll admit, I was pretty intimidated going to the Latin Mass for the first time, and it took me a while to get really back into the groove, because you're so integrated with the Novus Ordo in your in your upbringing. But it wasn't until maybe 2 years ago where I met my wife, and that's pretty much that Latin Mass or nothing type of,
Oh man.
But
so your whole foray into it then was you were just invited, which, by the way, my brother was married at Blessed Sacrament. I think we talked about that the other day, but yeah, he was married in that church. That church is, man, we used to go to Stations of the Cross there. What a beautiful parish that is. But yeah, so that was your first foray into it, huh?
Yeah. But
God bless that priest for inviting you.
Like, I kind of just felt like God was leading me to the Latin Mass anyways, because that is the tradition, is what I had always desired anyways. It's kind of ingrained in me to love tradition and more reverence towards the Mass and what's happening, another Calvary, not so bloody happening in the military style. That Roman military style is just so beautiful.
Oh yeah.
It's
I don't think anybody would go if it was a bloody sacrifice, though. I don't.
No, not at all. But everything is centered on the Mass, and that's where it should be today, in my humble opinion. We should be at the altar and praying with the priest, and he's making the sacrifice, and he's the bridge for our sins that we commit daily, so
absolutely offering that sacrifice on behalf of his faithful. Yeah, well said. So from Seattle, from your first time going to the Latin Mass, did you continue to go, or did you kind of like bounce back and forth?
I would continually to go. It since being too intimidated by it, I was kind of like, oh man, because then you got to go through a missal and I talk slow, so naturally I'm slow. So so I mean, I'd get kind of frustrated pretty easily, but I think it wasn't until I met my wife, she kind of encouraged me a little bit more, and I kind of was. It's kind of like you have your workout partner now, and now you can lift weights, and you're not so intimidated anymore. That was kind of my experience.
I know that analogy well. Oh my gosh. Geez. That's funny. That's true. That's very good. So, okay. So once you started going to it full time, let's say, okay, so fast forward, you met your wife, right? You're not feeling as intimidated anymore. What has it done to your spiritual life? What kind of growth have you seen? In all humility, of course, but
Okay.
but just for the listener.
That's a good question. No, I'll be honest with you. So even though I went to Nova Sordo, I was involved with this lay group called Opus Dei, and in my humble opinion, there is probably as close to any kind of more Latin practicing congregation as you get. So I think I was pretty much well formed and prepared for the Latin Mass through Opus Dei. So
Yeah.
because they're probably the only group that really kind of encourages the practice of mortification and fasting and all these kind of old practices. So that really kind of encouraged me more towards the Latin Mass. And you go to confession today and you hear like Father Nichols like recommending something you do for reparation. I mean, it's the same practice that Opus Dei kind of encourages. So I think God and the Holy Spirit was preparing me for the Latin Mass.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, I can't really say it. I think it mainly just seals the deal. Like, yes, you're supposed to be here.
Gotcha. It's kind of like if I understand you correctly, it's more like a fulfillment of the journey as you were going through.
Exactly. It's kind of like you finally reached the finish line.
Yeah. Except
Yeah.
you're not dead. So yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not to be morbid about it, but yeah, no, that's really cool. That's awesome, man. That's good stuff. Anything else you want to button up with? Put a bow on it?
I mean, it's a very beautiful experience, especially when you can share it with like your wife who has had an appreciation for it since she was a little girl, and she was able to kind of help me along the way and encourage me. I mean, she bought me my first, or I want to say second missal, because I did have one, but someone to go to mass with and share that beauty. And I mean, we got married in the Latin Mass, so that was very beautiful. So I mean, I guess that's where God wanted us to fulfill our vocation, and it's very beautiful, and I'm very honored to have gone through the traditional route.
Good. Very good, man. That's awesome. And how long would you say you've been doing that? How long have you been going to strictly Latin Mass?
So I would have to say since I've met my wife,
Gotcha.
because
So
we would go to Richmond, St. Joseph's in Richmond, and we'd meet there. It's like the halfway point from DC to from Chesapeake.
Yeah.
So we'd go to mass there, and actually that's where it truly kind of grew. I mean, it blossomed there. It was like, and I met my wife, so
yeah. So you know Father Franco,
cool. Huh?
You know Father Franco then?
So he wasn't there when we were.
Oh.
Yeah.
He was my youth group. He was in my youth group. I was
okay.
I was the assistant youth minister at that point. So
I think he was saying mass on the side altar the other day.
He was. I wanted to see him, but
that was cool, man.
Yeah, that was interesting. I've never seen that before. And
I
for
saw
those of you,
Nicholas do that once.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, because Father Krager was saying mass, and then he was finishing up his mass.
Ah, yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
beautiful experience. Me and my wife, we just went to Rome for our honeymoon, and we got to go see some Latin masses there, and we saw the priest saying, the masses like on the side altars and be led with a candle, and it was
Yeah.
like the most beautiful experience I think we've both ever seen, because you don't see that anywhere.
No, and so for those who've never been to a Latin mass, the priests, so there's more than one altar. There's more than one tabernacle. You have the main altar in the center, and then you have the two side altars. And oftentimes you'll see a priest celebrating mass almost with the rest of the congregation, but like Father Franco, but they're celebrating mass for, what are they're doing that for, and I'm new to this guy, so I'm still kind of learning this stuff, but they usually celebrate that for the people that they need to take communion to, correct?
Right.
Yep.
I mean, well, they're just doing their low mass, I mean, just to say the mass for the day. But
Yeah.
when we were there, there were like 5 masses going on, at the same time. It was pretty cool.
Oh, wow.
It was, yeah, and we
That's
were waiting
awesome.
for the actual mass of the day at the main altar, and we were able to experience them getting led. One's doing the mass, the other one's getting led, doing another mass, and it just like around the church where all the altars were.
Oh man, that's incredible.
Yeah, man.
I would love to see something like that, because that was the first time the other day when Father was doing it on the side altar. That's the first time I'd ever seen that. I mean, I knew that they did it, but that was the first time I've ever seen that before.
Yeah, man. I mean, we went to the main FSSP parish there in Rome.
Sure.
I think it's the Trinity, like the Pilgrim of the Trinity or something. I'm totally messing it up, but if you want to look it up, it was a very beautiful parish. But we also got to experience the Institute of Christ the King. We went to Florence, Italy, and we went to one of their beautiful parishes. And then we actually went to another FSSP parish in Venice. So we went to an evening mass there. So we were going to mass like for we saw all the Latin masses in Italy, and it was very beautiful. And yeah, my wife is awesome. She got me.
Oh, that's so cool, man. Oh, good stuff, man. Very good. Well, you and I have extremely similar backgrounds. Actually quite amazed at our backgrounds. It's kind of funny. So we'll go into the similarities in just a minute, but so I grew up small town Stanwood, Camino Island, Washington State, right? Born in Kent, and then we moved up there when I was 5 or 6 and stayed up there. My dad was a police officer of that small town, and so there was one parish there, St. Cecilia's, and it's been there for, oh man, well, I'm sorry, I don't know how long it's been there. I think it's been there since about the 40s. They built it as a gym, and then they turned it into a Catholic church, so it's kind of interesting. But
yeah, when I was there were a lot of gyms that were turned into Catholic church.
I know, isn't that weird? I know, because
Yeah.
I think in the 40s, like everybody wanted to go to the gym or something. I don't know, but anyway,
They're like halls.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's this big building. It's a fairly beautiful church. It's not, but it's all we had. I mean, everything around us, there wasn't a church for 40 miles. I mean, it was insane. And it was right up the street from our house. And then we moved to the Camino Island, and there's no Catholic church out there, but there's 20,000 people on the island by itself. And there's no Catholic church. There's tons of Protestant churches, no Catholic church. So anyway, I grew up there. I did my first Holy Communion there. Actually did all my sacraments there except for baptism and marriage. But all my, my confirmation, first Holy Communion, first confession, everything was there. And growing up, we only had 2 priests. I mean, it's pretty crazy. Father Matthew and Father Paul. Those are the only 2 people that they bounced. It's kind of funny because Father Paul went away, went down to California. Father Matthew came, and then all of a sudden Father Matthew was leaving a couple of years later, and Father Paul came right back up from California. It was a Carmelite parish, so it was kind of neat to see them, and their robes and everything like that. So they instituted a lot of Carmelite spirituality, kind of interesting. But anyway, I had a woman named Betty, who, man, as a young kid, I remember her taking a piece of paper and drawing a circle that showed the church, Christ Church. And she drew a straight line down, and she said, right here is where the church split off, and the Orthodox Church went this way, but the Catholic Church kept going straight. And then right here is where the Protestant churches broke off in the 1500s and went their separate ways. And I remember getting taught apologetics from a very young age, which was super beneficial for.
That's neat.
Yeah, it was neat. And I remember I was my daughter's age. I was 8 years old, and I could kind of understand. You know what I mean? I knew that the church was the one true church, and it's
Right.
a lot easier when someone knows that when they're really young, because once you get that embedded, into your head, and then you have the research to show that it's the one true church, not that it's some kind of lie or something like that. It's easier to hold on to something like that. So even when I went through my rebellious stage in my teens, which does not have to be a stage, but I definitely went through one. I still held to that. I still knew that God exists, Christ existed, and that the Catholic Church was the one true church, even though it's back in my head, even when I was going to Protestant churches for a little while. So, but anyway, grew up, in that environment, which is really, really helpful. It always seemed like the Protestants were always out to get us to in Washington State, where I was at, because you always had them. They, for some odd reason back then, they were allowed to visit the school, and they could take you out of class, and you could go to this thing called the Good News Club.
It's called ecumenical. I can't even say it, dude.
Yeah, ecumenism. Yeah. Ecumenism. At the beginning of this podcast. Yeah, which is so ridiculous. Right at the beginning of this podcast is so ridiculous. But we had to do it, guys. We had to do it. So yeah, but that being said, I remember these complete strangers could just come up to you at school and be like, "Hey, you want to hear the good news?" And the teachers would be like, "Yeah, go ahead and go. It's no big deal." But anyway, they bring me in there and try to convert us and everything else. And that's when Betty told me, that's when she showed me that. She drew that picture and she drew the diagram. And it was just, I think back on it now, and it's just the most beautiful thing in the world. Funny thing, she was my confirmation sponsor. So she got me through my first Holy Communion and my confirmation. Like, it was just awesome, man. We hadn't seen each other in years. We just reconnected. It was kind of neat. But anyway, I went through a phase. My parents as well got divorced in high school, and I was playing metal music as well. It's so funny.
Boy.
I was like big into it too. It was pretty crazy. I didn't really get into the dark stuff. I always kind of felt really weird about that stuff. Like, I never got into Marilyn Manson and some of those things, right? That stuff just always kind of, to me, it was always just super strange, right? So anyway, I stayed away from that stuff, but yeah, I got into some pretty dark stuff. I was like this kid that was like, "Oh, I hate the government, dude." And
Gotcha.
I remember I had an American flag on the back of I had a camouflage jacket, right? That I had like an American flag on the back. It was upside down and stuff. And I was like, "Oh, I'm so
You're
cool."
a punker.
Oh, I was, absolutely. I love punk rock music and metal music. I like metal music
punk
a lot
rock
more.
too.
Yeah, me too. I like ska music. I think ska is fun. I've always liked ska music, like Less Than Jake. I've always liked them. I don't know why. So, No FX, right? It's not a good
No
band.
Effects, yeah. I remember them.
Yeah, but I went back and listened to some of their stuff. It's absolutely terrible. But anyway, yeah, so I had and by the way, for anybody listening that knows me, I did all that stuff overnight, right? I came to school one day and I was like this preppy dressed kid. And I went home one night and went to Hot Topic and bought like everything, and then went to school the next day. I was like, man, I'm so cool. I wanted to emulate those guys. But my parents were going through a divorce, and it was rough.
Yeah, you fall into that trap where you need to belong somewhere.
I know, right? And why is it nowadays too, when I walk anywhere near a Hot Topic, it's like that's kind of like the threshold of hell, and if you go through that, you're you ever notice like the door to Hot Topic is like,
I see it. It's like a mouth, like
I know, it's just devouring youth. Yeah. And, oh man, that place gives me the creeps now. But anyway, yeah, I used to be super cool like that, right? So I was so cool. Luckily so my parents got divorced, and then I was in a band for a long time and played a lot of metal music, and it was like the new metal stuff, really.
Okay.
But then I started kind of I always wanted the lyrics to not be dark or anything. I always wanted to have like some kind of Christian lyrics, something like we're reaching up to God or something like that. So then I got involved with a praise and worship band at a Protestant church, and they kind of brought me in because of that dark period, right? And unfortunately, I wasn't getting any kind of guidance at my church at this point. My dad was really busy with the divorce and everything, and he was a cop and he was a detective. So it's pretty, I was just kind of reaching for straws a little bit. My dad and I are really close, and we always have been. So thank God I had that going through that, because I don't know what I would have done. And my parents kind of let me do this whole rebellion thing, right? Because I wasn't doing drugs. I knew that, and they kind of let me do this thing. So anyway, so I got with this Protestant group of guys. We started playing some music, some praise and worship and stuff. And then eventually I started hanging out with these guys a lot, going fishing with them and everything else. And around the same time, when I was about 17, I got into apologetics. I read Tim Staples' book, Nuts and Bolts, and I couldn't put it down. I just couldn't put it down. I don't know what it was. It was just like that Betty again, right? It was the whole mindset that she gave me when I was a young kid. And the nuts and bolts thing, man, it just clicked with me. And then my uncle was like, "You like that? I've got this guy named John Martinoni." So he gave me all these John Martinoni CDs, and I started listening to those. I just devoured them. And as I'm devouring these things, now granted, guys, I'm not an apologist, okay? I don't even consider myself an amateur apologist. Since I joined the military, that kind of stuff has escaped me a little bit. But I can explain my faith decently, right? At least to the average Joe, right? I'm not going to be able to get on a debate with somebody. But the Protestants started asking me all kinds of questions because I was going to their services, but they knew I was Catholic. So they started asking me about the saints and about Mary and all this stuff. And I remember just kind of like being able to rattle these things off and kind of reason with them and everything. And they're like, "Oh, I never thought about that." Some of those classic arguments. And then I remember, I kept going to these altar calls like all the time. Like every time they'd have an altar call, right? They'd be like, "Hey, come on up, be saved, put your hand up and give it to Christ," right? And so I remember going up to these things. I remember somebody asking me like, "Why do you go to these altar calls all the time? Like, why are you constantly going to these things?" I was like, "Well, I constantly need to be converted. I constantly need to be reminded, and keep in mind, everyone, I was still going to Catholic Mass at this point too. My parents kept us going to Catholic Mass, interestingly enough, even though both my parents were kind of falling away Catholics at that point, they still knew to get us to Mass. So I was still going to Mass, and I was going to my Protestant altar calls. I was trying to get that fix, that feeling fix. I just needed it, right? Now I had no idea this was sinful or anything like that back then. I didn't realize.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's a lot of things you didn't know that were sinful that you were doing, and I mean, that's been my experience too, but I'll let you continue.
No, yeah, absolutely. No, no, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's so true, right? And I didn't know, and obviously I was ignorant of it, so it wasn't necessarily, I wasn't doing it on my own volition. So, oh yeah, and by the way, I went to Catholic school for 3 years, and unfortunately, it didn't do anything for me. My 6th grade teacher she was one of those Catholics that, like, Celestine prophecy Catholic. She was New Age. She believed in like power between your fingers and the power of attraction and all this weird stuff. Yeah, very interesting. She was very Gnostic, and she taught at a Catholic school. Very secret knowledge, like there's secret knowledge that only some of us can tap into, right? Just super, like, weird, very weird. My 7th grade teacher.
She needs to go to confession,
huh? Probably. He's a deliverance is what. My mom at this time too, she had rosaries with crystals as beads and stuff like that, because they brought power. And I remember my mom took me a bunch of these New Age things where they were like Reiki healing and all this weird stuff, man. Yeah, wow. Just super bizarre. So I was definitely exposed to some very dark things against my will when I was a kid. And I'm very grateful that the Lord protected. I totally forgot about that until you mentioned what you said about this.
Off topic here, but I'll let you continue. But a lot of that stuff kind of brings like this whole sex magic stuff,
Oh yeah, isn't that stuff weird? Which, by the way, is a family program.
Just those spells and whatnot. But yeah.
Yeah, dude, I cannot tell you some of the weird, bizarre, asinine things that my mom believed. when I was young. I love her to death. I love my mother, but man, there was some weird stuff. And granted, she doesn't do that stuff anymore, but man, it was so strange. So anyway, fast forward now back to Protestantism. But this guy altar calls, right? I'm constantly having to be converted, right? And I told him this, and he goes, why? Once you're saved once, you're always saved, man. And I was like, okay, that's bizarre. That doesn't, in my head, that just never made any sense to me. I'm like, well, what if I fall into sin? What good does that do me? And they're like, well, you won't. If you're a true believer, you won't fall into sin. I'm thinking in my head, that logic doesn't really make, I don't know why yet, but that logic doesn't make any sense. And so anyway, just over time of explaining things, I basically explained myself right back into the Catholic Church, like full front, just kick in the front door, like make me a Catholic. The problem is that delayed my confirmation because I was supposed to go through with a bunch of youth group kids. And at that point, I started getting into the charismatic Catholic movement. And so then I was like praying over people. We were getting slayed in the spirit, like, like full fall down on the ground.
Is that part of that the charismatic? Was that part of a Catholic church? Or
yeah, it wasn't Protestant at all. So at this point, I'd kind of like I said, explained my way right back into the church. But I'd left my bands, right, and I was just doing some solo stuff. I was actually rapping, so maybe one of these days I'll find that and let you hear it. It's probably pretty awful at this point, but
did you make an intro here?
yeah, I did. Yeah, I produced music and stuff. I've done that for a while, just as a kind of a side hobby, for fun. But anyway, I got in the charismatic movement and was really charismatic for a while. Believed in the laying on of hands and praying and slaying in the spirit and speaking in tongues and things like that. I will tell you that throughout all of that, my faith really did blossom, but it was really based on feeling. It wasn't really based on like a true devotion, right? So if God would have lifted his hand off me at that point, it probably would have been right back to the Protestants.
It's like you just needed honey to have faith.
Yeah, and the Lord really protected me through, especially that whole Reiki phase and that weird stuff. But also through this phase as well. Not that it was bad, because it wasn't all bad, right? There's some beautiful charismatic people out there. I met some very holy people that like you just see them and they're so humble. But I had one experience. I'm not going to go into it too much now. I had one experience that really turned me off. In fact, it was an experience where Father had walked into the church in the middle of one of these things and turned the lights on and said, everybody get up and leave my church now. And I never forget that, because all the people that were slayed in the spirit on the ground who were having all these mystical experiences, they immediately just got up and left. Almost like, and I remember looking at these people and being like, wait a minute. If you're really in a trance of the Holy Spirit, the Holy Spirit would allow you to snap out. I mean, maybe it was obedience to God. I don't know, but I have a feeling things were starting to get a bit weird. So I'm just not going to lie. Things were getting a bit weird, and I didn't feel right. And God protected me from that as well. Because after that, I kind of got away from that. And it's not, again, I'm not knocking people who are charismatic at all, but there were a couple times there where it just, nah, bye Felicia.
Yeah,
like I'm done. So,
but it's amazing too how just the Novus Ordo that we grew up with was more based on feeling,
Yeah, it was. It really was in the theology.
Faith,
I remember I also played drums. I was a drummer at Mass. Yes, I was. Y'all can comments below. When we eat this bread and we drink this cup, ding, ding, ding. Yeah, I was that guy. And then I played guitar. I went from that to playing guitar and singing, and I really loved singing. It was a lot of fun. But they were the cheesy Simon and Garfunkel Catholic songs. So, and my dad used to laugh. He used to hate them so much, right? I think he still does. But anyway, fast forward. I'm all these apologetics and stuff. I'm really starting to get into my faith, and I decided to join the military. Before I joined the military, I went down to St. Timothy's in Arizona and got a bunch of youth ministry training. I got a certificate in youth ministry from them because I really wanted to do that as well, right? And then I was doing my hip hop stuff on the side. But I decided to join the military, just like you, Dan. I joined the Air Force. And, boot camp was fine, kept my faith. Tech school was a little bit weird. I went through a phase again where I was wasn't going to the Protestant church to worship with them, but I was helping them out with music because I was good. I had a talent for it, and they needed singers, and so I thought maybe I could help out. But I remember avoiding communion there because I was like, no, I'm not going to do that because I knew it was, aligning myself with something I didn't believe in. Then I get here to Virginia, my first duty station, and got immediately plugged in through the Holy Spirit with a couple folks that were at, one of the churches here. And, I did assistant youth ministry with them, and I loved it, man. It was just awesome. I was doing my apologetics. I was giving talks. I was going on trips with these guys and everything else, and really enjoyed it. And that was my first experience with the Latin Mass, because one of the kids, David Franco, his family invited me to come one Sunday. And I remember going, not with their family. I just kind of showed up and went. And occasionally I would go occasionally. And to me, it was like a novelty. It was like this nice, shiny new thing that I'd never seen before. And I was like, oh yeah, I'll go. That sounds so cool. I'll just go a couple times here and there. And, over time, Father Nichols became, my frequent confessor, my spiritual director. But I wasn't going there as a parishioner, and him and I used to go, we'd go to confession, and then we would go, and I always loved confession there. It's never face-to-face. Unless there's an extreme reason why it has to be, there's never face-to-face. It's always behind a veil. And I always appreciated that, because it's not that I always thought that face-to-face confessions made me a lot more humble as a person, because it was kind of embarrassing. But at least there, it was very reverent. There was just a different kind of reverence. There was a veil there, right? And Father never had an occasion of remembering who it was or anything like that. So
yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah, I always loved that. And so I remember,
mystery man.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, for 7 years, once I met Father Nichols, so about 5 years before we went to Alaska, Father Nichols and I had this, just every once in a while we talk and things like that. And I would come to spiritual direction. He'd guide me. And then Father Geddes, he was another one that really, impacted my life. And seeing the difference between that and the priests at the church I was going to. The priests at St. Ben's, there was just a humility about them. There was a sense of service, a sense of duty that I'd never seen before. You've probably seen the more recent picture of the priest walking through the rain to administer sacraments to people in a car accident. It's pouring down rain. You probably saw that. If you ever pay attention, 1 Peter 5's got a really good article about that. And that's what I saw day in and day out, was a sacrificial priesthood. So, so we went to Alaska, and again, like I said, and then I got married. We got married Novus Ordo. All my kids have been baptized in Novus Ordo parishes. So, that's just how it was. We weren't ready to make that commitment yet. And my wife had converted from Protestantism. And so for her, the Mass, I didn't, I just never really thought it was an option for us to go to Latin Mass. It's far a drive. It's all this other stuff, blah, 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 blah. Go to Alaska, spend 3 amazing years up there, but there's they finally started doing the Latin Mass in Alaska, and it was like a 1 o'clock or 2 p.m. Mass on a Sunday with the Dominicans. And so, which you might know Father Augustine, or I don't know if you know him from the Dominicans, right? So he was up there. He was my spiritual director up there.
Yeah, it's the same province.
Yes. Yep. So he went down to see us. It's kind of funny. Our lines are intertwining.
I know, it's like, didn't know Matt, but
no idea who you are at this time.
And you're in the Air Force.
Yeah, no kidding, man. So I'm up there in Alaska, and I remember we started going to that because my wife and I just kind of felt like this. Again, we were just attracted to it because it felt like everywhere else was just based off of sheer feeling. And every time we'd get in the car and drive away, now granted, this was not good of us, right? This is probably not a good reason, but every time we get in the car, we'd just be frustrated because all we heard at Mass was the same stuff, the same, I wanted to hear about my faith. I wanted the real faith, not the faith of, this particular church, that particular church. I wanted the real faith. And so the Dominicans were giving us that. And the church was beautiful. All the other churches around looked like communist buildings in Pripyat, Russia. They just weren't beautiful. So then fast forward to about a year and a half ago, because we came back down here. I'm not going to bore everybody with the details. My faith has taken way different forms over the last couple of years, and it's become much more serious, maybe more intellectual at times. I don't have the same feelings anymore about Christ that I had before. It's like, it's like the way you love your spouse, right? At first it's just infatuation, but then eventually it grows into a really much deeper understanding of who she is, right? So I've grown into a love of Christ that is it's beyond feeling and emotion. Sometimes it's good to have that, but right now it's in a different phase. Go ahead.
Yeah, you bring up a good point, because when I recall as a kid, like you have that feeling after mass. Oh yeah, like that was so good, and then like 2 hours later,
awesome, dude.
You're fighting with your sister again.
I know, right? Yeah, no kidding. And I was just kind of going my day-to-day life, not really. I don't know. Even when I was doing youth ministry, where I was doing it, it always felt really good to do youth ministry with the youth group kids and with the guys I was going. And by the way, shout out to the Plex, right? There was a duplex that had women upstairs and all men downstairs, which was a recipe for disaster when you look back on it. But that really bolstered my faith, because those guys I met there and the gals that I met there were on fire for Christ. And so they were just beautiful people, and they really led me into my faith at that point, into a much deeper way. And they're part of the reason I'm going to the Latin Mass now. They really encouraged me to keep growing in my faith. So that was really good. So anyway, fast forward, I got married, I've got 4 kids now, and, I actually live about an hour and 20 minutes away from the church, right? But about a year and a half ago, my wife and I, we listened to a couple of the TNT podcasts with Taylor Marshall and Tim Gordon. And they were talking about, the Latin Mass. They're really being challenging to people. Say the rosary every day. I started, really making it a point to say my rosary every day. And through the course of listening to them, when this whole McCarrick's candle broke out and everything else, they were the only ones, them and LifeSite, and Church Militant, and some other Catholic, bloggers and things like that were the only ones that were talking about this. EWTN was kind of brushing it off like it was nothing. And I'm not knocking EWTN. Yeah, absolutely. EWTN has led me into avenues of my faith that I never knew, like listening to Patrick Coffin on Catholic Answers Live and stuff like that. All these people are major influences in my life. So I was really hoping to hear something more about this from our leadership. And my wife and I weren't hearing a thing about it. Like, not a thing from anybody, except for, Taylor Marshall and the TNT podcast and like those bloggers and stuff that I was telling you, and Tim Gordon and 1 Peter 5 and LifeSite News. They're reporting on all this when no one else would. And I'd been reading about some of this stuff for years, and it just exploded. And we weren't hearing it from anybody until talking to Father Nichols. And when I talked to Father Nichols about it, I went to a daily mass, and his heartfelt, sincere anger towards what was going on. Sincere anger, righteous anger, right? He wasn't throwing things or yelling or anything like that, but you could just see it. And we had a long conversation about it. And I remember, like, the next week I took my family to the Latin Mass, all 4 kids. We all had veils. Actually, I think
you have a veil.
Yeah, right. Yeah, my son and I had veils. No,
I'm kidding, dude.
Yeah, I know. No, my wife had actually, my wife didn't have a veil. No one had a veil. We got there. We rolled up. We're probably 5 minutes late. Hot mess. My kids are crazy. Everybody's nuts. Couldn't understand a thing that was going on. I had the missal in front of me, but I couldn't pay attention. My kids are losing their minds. I'm like kneeling when people are trying to stand. I'm standing when people are sitting down. I'm kneeling when people are not supposed to kneel. Big giant mess. So I remember leaving, but I remember knowing this is right for my family right now. Like, we have to do this. Why? Because the church needs difficulty. Liturgy means work. We need to work. We need to work out our faith in fear and trembling. And I just had this conviction, this just like, I've got to be here. Father's been trying to pull me here for years and years and years, and I haven't done it yet. And so finally we did it. And I remember going to the car and thinking, oh no, my wife is gonna hate me for dragging her all the way down here. Kids are crazy. She doesn't know what the heck is going on. And I remember getting in the car and just dreading the conversation on the way home. And I remember looking at my wife and I said, well, how'd you like it? Now, she'd been before a long time ago and it was whatever. And she looked at me and she said, Matt, I feel like that's the first time I've ever been to Mass in my entire life. And at that moment, I knew we were staying. So, yeah. So just for all that to say, I've been on, one end of the spectrum all the way to the other end of the spectrum, and coming from sheer feeling and emotion and then having to take that and turning into energy, like to work, because like you said, the missile's a mess, right? You're playing Yahtzee with this thing. You open it up, hoping you're on the right page. You're flipping these things around. Your kids are grabbing the tabs and pulling it off. Driving you crazy. But the music is beautiful. I've never heard anything like that. The movements are beautiful. Everything, just like what I said at the beginning of the last podcast, the beginning of this one, we're trying to live as men of intention. And we intentionally made that choice because every movement in that Mass to me and my wife has an intent to it. There's something to it. You're not allowed to make up a bunch of stuff. The priest isn't allowed to be like, let's stand right now. Let's kneel right now. Let's just make it up as we go along. And I'm not saying again.
Stand around the altar.
Yeah. Yep. If I didn't have the Novus Ordo at all growing up, I would not be where I am today. So I appreciate my upbringing. Yeah, and it's a valid Mass. I'm not knocking, the validity of the Mass, and Dan and I aren't trying to do that at all. It's a valid Mass. We're not saying that, but the
Eucharist is the same. It's just
absolutely,
it's not united though.
No, and there's a superiority.
The Latin makes things united, but
Yep. That was
one parish doing one thing here, other one's doing something else over here. The language is different. Might go to a Spanish,
Yep.
And English here, and then doing an African parish, over here, and might be confused, but the Latin kind of standards puts that standard of, where you're going. We're all part of the Latin Rite.
Yeah, it standardizes everything. And that really is the universal, the universality of the church. It's the same. The sacrifice of the Mass is the same yesterday as it is today, and it will be tomorrow, right? It's that everlasting sacrifice that never changes. And unfortunately, we have these two separate things now, and thank God for Pope Benedict XVI and his motu proprio on discussing this topic, because otherwise we wouldn't have the access to it the way that we have now. So, but man, yeah. So that's kind of, how we came. Took me a little bit to get there, but my faith journey is, it's always been pretty good. It just, So like I said, two ends of the spectrum, one based off feeling and emotion, one based off of, and then a full swing to the other side where it's not, and to me, the Latin Mass is not an extreme. A lot of people think it's this extreme. It's not. It's like you said, it's the fulfillment of my faith.
Intentional, like you said.
Yeah, everything's intentional about it. There's no wishy-washiness. Everybody kneels at the same time. And not like in my home parish, unfortunately, where the bishop said you don't have to kneel after you receive communion. You have to stand. And before that, it was, hey, during the consecration, you will stand. And yet my family's the only one kneeling. You don't have that kind of confusion in the Latin Rite. It is what it is, and you're not going to change it. And you don't have to worry about making responses. I realized that the Mass for me, not for everybody, by the way, but for me, it became more about me than it was about what was happening on the altar. What can I get out of it? So, anyway.
Yeah, very, very well said. And it's not even really about you. It's about what's going on, with the priest, in the consecration, and so that's the main thing, And,
yeah, absolutely.
I mean, that's where our Latin Rite needs to get back to, and it's Jesus that converts sinners, not any man.
Absolutely.
The Holy Trinity.
Yep.
We can only do by participation or whatever God by his providence allows, and we do so little, but it's all him. It's
Yep.
his church.
Yep. Well said. It's not mine. That's for sure. One of these days I'll have to share my story of a woman named Muffin. Not even kidding. That was a interesting conversation. Maybe I'll have my wife on one of these days. We'll talk about that story. That's interesting. But she seemed to think that the church was hers. So very interesting. That was an interesting day. I'll tell you that. Anyway, Dan, it's getting kind of late. We've been dragging this on out enough for our listeners. You want to close in prayer? You have anything else you want to say?
Definitely.
Cool. You have anything else you want to say to put a bow on it?
Men out there, get that devotion to Saint Joseph and become traditional. We're pulling, we ain't forcing, but we're trying to encourage you guys to maybe try out the Latin Mass.
Yeah, just give it a shot. If it's not for you, it's not for you. You can still read up on all the traditional stuff, get that good, wholesome Catholic spirituality. But yeah, absolutely. Dan's grabbing something. I don't know he's getting. Anyway, all right, guys. So hey, please subscribe, like, leave comments. Let us know where we screwed up. If we screwed up anywhere, send us a email.
Yeah, fraternal correction is definitely encouraged.
Very welcome. Fraternal, right? As iron sharpens iron. Just don't. My fragile ego can't take you cussing at me.
And don't mind my California accent or anything,
You do have kind of the surfer vibe. I've got the stressed out Washingtonian syndrome going on over here. Anyway,
I'll leave with one last story here.
Okay, go ahead.
So a long time ago, I was a senior airman, and I worked for the Defense Intelligence Agency, and I had a Navy captain ask me what I was smoking because I talked so slow. And, I was just like, whoa,
Man, tell that guy not smoking nothing.
But
you tell that guy.
So don't mind me and my slow ways. I have a theory. Everything starts on the east, and by the time it gets to the west, we don't even care anymore. So.
No, that's true. That's funny. That's a good way to put it.
So we're a bunch of West Coast guys, on the East Coast. So
yeah,
don't hate.
Yeah, don't hate because we don't hate you. So knock it off. All right, man. I'm going to go ahead and take off my hat. We'll go ahead and say in Our Father, if you wouldn't mind saying the other side. But yeah, guys, please subscribe. Leave us some notes. Email us at lightofthepatriarchs@gmail.com. And if you have correction, please correct us. Just please give us a resource so that we know where to look it up so we can make sure that we're hitting up the right points. So anyway, thanks, guys, for listening. And we'll go ahead and close in prayer. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Pater noster, qui es in caeli, sanctificetur nomen tuum, veniat regnum tuum, fiat voluntas tua, sicut in cielo et in terra.
Panem nostrum quotidianum da nobis hodie, et dimitte nobis debita nostra, sicut nos dimitibus debitoribus nostris, et ne nos inducas in tentationem, sed libera nos a malo. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
Amen.
Lumen Patriarcharum, ora pro nobis.
Ora pro nobis.
All right, guys. See you guys later.
All right. Night.